The spring rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bennett Cross's penthouse office in downtown Seattle, each drop a tiny percussion against the glass that separated him from the sprawling city below. He stood with his back to his assistant, Marcus, who shuffled nervously behind him, clutching a tablet loaded with the day's catastrophes. "The board is demanding answers," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The prototype failure cost us $12 million. Investors are threatening to pull out." Bennett didn't turn around. At 42, he'd built cross-tech solutions from a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire, and he'd done it by never showing weakness. His reflection in the rain-streaked window showed a man with sharp features, graying temples, and eyes that had forgotten how to soften. "Schedule an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," Bennett said. "And fire the entire development team. I want new blood by Monday." "Sir, that's 37 people. Some have been with us for..." "Did I ask for commentary, Marcus?" The assistant fell silent and retreated from the office. Bennett remained at the window, alone with his thoughts and the relentless rain. Somewhere in the building below, his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, was probably consulting with her divorce attorneys, calculating exactly how much of his fortune she could extract. Amanda had filed papers 3 weeks ago, citing emotional abandonment, among a litany of other grievances. She'd already moved into their vacation home in the San Juan Islands with their 2 teenage daughters, who now refused to take his calls. The empire he'd built was crumbling, and Bennett Cross did what he always did when facing adversity. He worked harder, pushed people away, and refused to acknowledge the growing emptiness inside him. Rosa Mendoza arrived at the Rostec headquarters building at 5:30 a.m., just as she had every weekday for the past 3 years. She pushed her cleaning cart through the employee entrance, nodding to the night security guard, who barely looked up from his phone. At 51, Rosa moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades making herself invisible to the wealthy and powerful people whose spaces she cleaned. Strapped to her chest in a modified baby carrier was 8-month-old Gabriel, her grandson. His dark eyes peered out at the gleaming lobby with curious intensity. Rosa's daughter, Carmen, was supposed to watch him during Rosa's shifts, but Carmen's struggle with addiction had intensified in recent months. 3 days ago, Rosa had found her daughter passed out on the couch, needle marks on her arm, and Gabriel crying in a soiled diaper. Rosa had taken the baby and hadn't looked back. She couldn't afford to lose this job. The $2,400 she made monthly was barely enough for her studio apartment and Carmen's court-ordered rehabilitation program, but it was all she had. Bringing Gabriel to work was a risk, against company policy, certainly, but Rosa had no choice. She'd hidden him successfully for 3 days now, working during the early morning hours when the building was mostly empty. "Sure, mijo," Rosa whispered as Gabriel began to fuss. She bounced gently as she pushed the cart toward the service elevator. "Just a few more hours, and then we go home." Gabriel quieted but remained alert, his tiny fingers gripping the edge of the carrier. Rosa had noticed something peculiar about her grandson over the past months. While other babies seemed content with anyone who held them, Gabriel was different. He tensed around strangers, sometimes crying until his face turned purple when Rosa's neighbors tried to hold him. The pediatrician said some babies were simply more sensitive, more attuned to the emotions of people around them. Rosa suspected it was something deeper. Gabriel seemed to sense things, the kindness or cruelty in a person's heart, perhaps. Her grandmother back in Oaxaca would have called it El Don, the gift. An old soul in a tiny body, Bennett left his office at 6:15 a.m. after working through the night. His eyes burned with fatigue, and his third energy drink had left him jittery and irritable. The executive floor was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. He wanted to get home, no, not home. That estate in Medina was Amanda's territory now. He'd been sleeping at a corporate apartment downtown, a sterile space that smelled of new carpet and loneliness. As he walked toward the private elevator, he heard it. A baby's laugh, bright and unexpected in the corporate silence. Bennett froze. He turned toward the sound and saw a woman in a cleaning uniform emerge from one of the conference rooms, a child strapped to her chest. The woman, Rosa, according to her name tag, stopped dead when she saw him, her face draining of color. Mr. Cross. I'm so sorry. I can explain, there's a baby in my building." Bennett's voice was flat, dangerous. "An unauthorized person in a secured facility. Please, sir. I have nowhere else to take him. Just for a few more days until I can arrange. Company policy is clear. No children in the workplace. It's a liability issue." Rosa's hands moved protectively to cradle Gabriel's head. "Mr. Cross, I've worked here for 3 years. I've never missed a day. I'll work extra hours, security will escort you out. You'll receive your final paycheck by mail." Bennett pulled out his phone, already composing a message to building security. What happened next would haunt Bennett for weeks to come. Gabriel, who had been quiet during the confrontation, suddenly reached out his tiny arms toward Bennett. The baby made an insistent sound, almost demanding, his fingers opening and closing in the universal gesture of wanting to be held. Rosa looked down at her grandson in shock. "No, mijo, not now," but Gabriel was insistent, leaning his entire body weight toward the stern man in the expensive suit, making urgent sounds of distress, because he wasn't being picked up. Bennett stared at the child, his phone forgotten. "What's he doing?" I don't know. He never does this. He doesn't like strangers." Rosa's voice was thick with confusion and fear. "Please, Mr. Cross, just let me take him and go." Gabriel's reaching turned to crying, but not the frightened cry he made around strangers. It was the frustrated cry of a baby being denied something he desperately wanted. His arms remained extended toward Bennett, his entire focus on the man who was about to destroy his grandmother's livelihood. Bennett felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built up over years of ruthless business decisions and emotional detachment. Almost against his will, he found himself stepping forward. "May I?" The words came out rough, unfamiliar. He couldn't remember the last time he'd asked permission for anything. Rosa hesitated, then carefully unstrapped Gabriel and held him out. The moment Bennett's hands touched the baby, Gabriel lunged forward with surprising strength, settling against Bennett's chest with a contented sigh that seemed impossible for such a tiny person. The baby's small hand rested over Bennett's heart, and Gabriel looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old, far too knowing. Then Gabriel smiled, a radiant, trusting smile, and closed his eyes, his body relaxing completely as if he'd finally found exactly where he was supposed to be. Bennett stood frozen, a baby in his arms for the first time in 15 years, since his own daughters were infants. He'd forgotten the weight, the warmth, the absolute trust inherent in a child's surrender. Gabriel's breath was soft against his neck, and Bennett felt something he hadn't felt in years, needed. Not for his money or his business acumen or his connections, but just as a human being providing comfort to another human being. "I don't understand," Rosa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He doesn't do this. Ever." Bennett looked at her properly for the first time, really looked. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the worn patches on her uniform, the desperate love in the way she watched her grandson. He saw himself through her eyes, a man with all the power, about to exercise it in the cruelest way possible. "What's his name?" Bennett asked quietly. "Gabriel." "How old?" 8 months. Bennett swayed slightly, an instinctive motion he didn't know he still remembered. Gabriel sighed again, his tiny fingers curling into the fabric of Bennett's designer shirt. "Why do you have him with you?" Rosa took a shaky breath and told him everything. Carmen's addiction, the court-mandated rehabilitation that cost $1,200 a month, the lack of childcare options at 5:30 a.m., the impossible choice between her grandson's safety and her job. She spoke quickly, expecting to be interrupted, but Bennett just listened, this strange man holding her grandson like he was something precious. When she finished, Bennett was quiet for a long moment. Gabriel had fallen asleep against his chest, the baby's breath evening out into a peaceful rhythm. Bennett looked down at the child, then back at Rosa. "My office. 1 hour. We need to talk about your employment situation." Rosa's heart plummeted. This was it, the formal termination, probably with security present. She reached for Gabriel, but Bennett stepped back slightly. "He's asleep. Let's not wake him." There was something different in Bennett's voice now, something softer. 1 hour, Ms. Mendoza. We'll figure this out." Bennett sat at his desk with Gabriel still asleep in his arms, staring at his computer screen without seeing it. His phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Marcus about the board meeting, from Amanda's lawyers about asset disclosure, from the PR team about damage control for the prototype failure. He ignored all of it. The baby weighed perhaps 20 pounds, barely anything, and yet Bennett felt the weight of him like an anchor, like something holding him to a reality he'd been floating away from for years. When had he last held his own daughters like this? When had they stopped reaching for him? He knew the answer. Around the time he'd started spending 18-hour days at the office, around the time he'd begun measuring his worth entirely in quarterly earnings and market share. Sophia and Emma were 14 and 16 now, and they were strangers to him. He'd missed their school plays to attend investor meetings. He'd forgotten birthdays because of product launches. He'd been physically present, but emotionally absent for so many years that when Amanda had asked for the divorce, the girls had simply shrugged. They'd lost their father long before the legal papers were filed. Gabriel stirred slightly, then settled again. His small hand was still pressed against Bennett's chest, right over his heart, as if he could feel it beating and found the rhythm comforting. Who was Bennett Cross, really? He'd spent 2 decades building a fortune while his marriage crumbled and his children grew distant. He'd fired people without a second thought, crushed competitors, made decisions that affected thousands of lives without considering the human cost. He'd become exactly what he'd once despised, his own father, a man who'd been rich in everything except what mattered. Gabriel chose that moment to wake up, his eyes blinking open slowly. He looked up at Bennett without fear, without hesitation, and gave him another one of those impossibly trusting smiles. Bennett felt something break inside him, really break, not just crack. It was the sound of ice shattering, of barriers falling, of a heart that had been frozen for years suddenly, painfully thawing. "What do you see in me that nobody else does?" Bennett whispered to the baby. "What made you reach for me?" Gabriel, naturally, had no answer. He just continued to look at Bennett with those knowing eyes, one small hand now reaching up to pat Bennett's cheek with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of infant affection. There was a soft knock at the door. Rosa stood there, looking terrified, her hands clasped tightly together. Bennett gestured for her to enter and sit down. "Ms. Mendoza, I need to apologize," Bennett began, and the words felt foreign in his mouth. "I was going to fire you for doing what any caring person would do, protecting a child. That says more about me than it does about you." Rosa's eyes widened. I understand the policy, Mr. Cross. I broke the rules are wrong." Bennett shifted Gabriel in his arms so he could see Rosa. The baby immediately reached for his grandmother, and Bennett carefully handed him back, feeling strangely bereft when the small weight was gone. Or rather, the rules don't account for real life, for the impossible choices people have to make. I built this company, Ms. Mendoza. I wrote those rules. And I've spent so long focused on policies and profits that I forgot about people. He turned to his computer and pulled up her employment file. "You've been here 3 years. Perfect attendance. Multiple commendations from your supervisor. You work the early shift, which means you're here when most people are sleeping, making sure this building is pristine before the executives arrive." He looked up at her. "I never even knew your name before today. That's unacceptable. Mr. Cross, I don't need special treatment. I just need to work. What's your daughter's rehabilitation program?" Rosa blinked at the sudden change of subject. "Sunrise Recovery Center. It's a 6-month program," court ordered. She's trying. This time might be different." Bennett made some notes. "And Gabriel's father?" "Not in the picture. Carmen was, it wasn't a good situation." "Do you have legal custody?" "Temporary emergency custody. The hearing is in 2 weeks. Carmen has to complete 30 days of treatment to even be considered for reunification, and even then." Rosa's voice broke. "I'm all he has right now." Bennett nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind, not a business plan, but something far more important. "Here's what's going to happen. First, you're not fired. Second, we're going to restructure your position. How would you feel about transitioning from cleaning services to facilities management? Same hours if you prefer, significant pay increase, and you'd supervise the night cleaning crew rather than doing it yourself." Rosa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Third," Bennett continued, "Cross-Deck has a corporate childcare facility on the 2nd floor. It's criminally underutilized, because I never bothered to publicize it properly. Gabriel will have a spot there, at no cost to you. The facility opens at 6 a.m., which means you can bring him to work with you and know he's safe and cared for while you're working." "I can't, that's too much." You deserve far more than what I'm offering, Ms. Mendoza. You've been doing excellent work for 3 years at minimum wage, while I paid myself bonuses that could feed 100 families. Bennett's voice was harsh now, but not with her, with himself. "Let me be clear, this isn't charity. This is me correcting a massive oversight in how this company treats its employees. You're the first, but you won't be the last." Rosa looked down at Gabriel, who was playing with her name tag, oblivious to the conversation reshaping his future. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why are you doing this?" Bennett looked at the baby, remembering the feel of that small hand over his heart. "Because Gabriel saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there. Because a child who's afraid of strangers reached for me when I was about to do something cruel. Because I have 2 daughters who won't talk to me, and I just realized I don't know how to be a decent human being anymore." He met Rosa's eyes. "Because I want to try to be the person that baby thought I was." The changes started immediately. Bennett cancelled the board meeting and spent the day instead touring every floor of Cross-Deck headquarters, something he hadn't done in 5 years. He spoke to janitors and security guards, administrative assistants and junior developers. He learned names. He listened to complaints. He saw his company through the eyes of the people who made it function, and he was ashamed of what he'd allowed it to become. Marcus found him in the mail room at 4 p.m., looking confused and concerned. "Sir, you've missed 3 critical meetings. The board is furious. Amanda's lawyers are threatening to." "Marcus, do you know how much we pay our cleaning staff?" What?" "Sir, I don't think that's relevant to, humor me." Marcus pulled up the information on his tablet. Starting wage is $15.50 per hour for night shift, $16.25 for day shift. And how much did I make per hour last year? That's not really, if you break down your annual compensation by hours worked, approximately $8,750 per hour. Bennett felt sick. So I make the equivalent of a cleaning person's annual salary in about 2 days. Sir, you're the CEO. You built this company. That's how capitalism works. Is it working, though? Really? Bennett turned to face his assistant. We have a 40% turnover rate in our support staff. We're constantly dealing with HR complaints. Our Glassdoor reviews are abysmal except for executive-level positions. We've created a company where the top thrives while everyone else struggles. And for what? So my net worth can go from $1.2 billion to $1.3 billion. What am I even doing with that money, Marcus? Marcus looked genuinely alarmed now. Mr. Cross, are you feeling all right? Should I call someone? I'm feeling clear-headed for the first time in years. Bennett headed for the elevator. Schedule an all-hands meeting for tomorrow at noon. Every employee, from executive level to maintenance. I want everyone there. And get me the contact information for every employee we've fired in the past 6 months. We need to review those decisions. Sir, some of those were your direct orders, I know. That's why we're reviewing them. The all-hands meeting the next day was chaos. The auditorium, which seated 500, was packed beyond capacity with employees who'd never been invited to such a gathering before. Bennett stood on the stage without notes, without a rehearsed speech, with nothing but the memory of a baby's trust and the weight of his own failures. I'm Bennett Cross, he began, and I've been a terrible boss. The room went silent. People exchanged confused glances. For the past 15 years, I've run this company like a machine, measuring success only in profit margins and stock prices. I've made decisions that enriched shareholders while ignoring the struggles of the people who make this company function. I've fired people without cause, denied raises while taking massive bonuses, and created a culture where only the top tier matters. Bennett paused, scanning the crowd. He found Rosa standing near the back, Gabriel on her hip. The baby was looking at him across the distance, and Bennett felt that same strange pull, the feeling of being seen, really seen, by someone who couldn't be fooled by money or power or carefully crafted public images. Yesterday, I met a woman who's been working here for 3 years, someone whose work I depend on every single day, and I didn't know her name. I was prepared to fire her for bringing her grandson to work, never stopping to ask why she'd risk her job by breaking that rule. I was so focused on policy and protocol that I'd completely lost sight of basic human decency. The crowd was riveted now, every eye on Bennett. That needs to change. I need to change. Effective immediately, CrossTech is implementing the following policies. Minimum wage for all employees will increase to $25 per hour. All support staff will receive full benefits, including health insurance with no employee contribution required. The corporate childcare facility will expand hours and be free to all employees. We'll establish a hardship fund for employees facing financial emergencies, managed by an independent committee of workers, not executives. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Bennett raised his hand for silence. Additionally, I'm cutting my own salary by 75%. The money saved will fund these initiatives. I'm also establishing a profit-sharing program, where 20% of quarterly profits will be distributed among all employees based on tenure and contribution. Now there was real noise, gasps, scattered applause, skeptical whispers. I know some of you are thinking this is a publicity stunt, or that I'll backtrack on these promises. I don't blame you for that skepticism. I've given you no reason to trust me. All I can say is this: I'm going to try to be better. I'm going to try to build a company where everyone matters, not just the people in corner offices. I'm going to try to be the kind of person who deserves the trust of people who work hard every day just to survive. Bennett locked eyes with Rosa across the room. Yesterday, a baby who's afraid of strangers reached out for me when I was at my worst. He saw something in me I'd forgotten was there. I want to be the person he thought I was. I want to build a company that person would be proud of. The applause started slowly, uncertain, then built to something real. Bennett didn't kid himself, words were cheap, and his employees would judge him by actions, not speeches. But it was a start. The board of directors was less impressed. They convened an emergency meeting that evening, and Bennett sat through 2 hours of outraged accusations about fiduciary responsibility and shareholder value. "You're destroying this company," Charles Worthington, the lead investor, practically shouted. "These reforms will cost us millions. Your compensation cut alone sends a terrible message to the market. The market will survive," Bennett said calmly. "We have $800 million in reserves. We're profitable even with these changes. The only thing being destroyed here is my personal fortune, and frankly, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. This is about that baby, isn't it?" Worthington's voice dripped with disdain. "Marcus told us. You had some emotional breakdown over a cleaning woman's grandchild, and now you want to turn this company into a charity. Gabriel didn't cause a breakdown. He caused a wake-up call. Bennett stood, gathering his materials. I built this company. I own 51% of voting shares. These changes are happening whether you approve or not. If you want to divest, I'll buy you out at fair market value. But I'm done building wealth at the expense of basic human decency. He walked out of the boardroom to a chorus of outraged protests, and he felt lighter than he had in years. The weeks that followed were transformative, though not always in easy ways. Several board members did leave, though most stayed, grumbling but intrigued by the experiment. The media coverage was intense and divided. Some outlets praised Bennett's reforms as revolutionary, while others criticized him as naive and self-destructive. The real changes, though, happened in quieter ways. The turnover rate at Crosstech dropped dramatically. Job applications flooded in from talented people who'd previously dismissed the company. Productivity increased as employees who'd been quietly struggling suddenly had the resources to focus on their work instead of their survival. Bennett started having lunch in the employee cafeteria instead of his office. He learned the names of the people who kept his building running. He made mistakes, plenty of them, and was called out by employees who were justifiably skeptical of his sudden conversion. He listened, apologized when necessary, and kept trying. Rosa thrived in her new role, bringing a level of organization to facilities management that impressed even the most cynical executives. Gabriel spent his days in the childcare facility, happy and healthy, while Rosa worked to secure permanent custody. Carmen completed her rehabilitation program and began the slow, difficult work of rebuilding her relationship with her son and her mother. Bennett anonymously funded her continued outpatient treatment through the company's new hardship fund, but the most significant change was in Bennett himself. He reached out to his daughters, not with expensive gifts or promises, but with simple presence. He asked about their lives and actually listened to the answers. He apologized, really apologized, for years of emotional absence. It would take time to rebuild those relationships, he knew. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. But Sophia and Emma were willing to try, cautiously, and that was more than Bennett deserved. He and Amanda finalized their divorce with far less acrimony than expected. She got the house and a fair settlement, and Bennett moved into a modest apartment downtown, close enough to walk to work. They'd never love each other again, that ship had sailed years ago, but they could be civil, could co-parent their nearly grown daughters, could move forward without bitterness. 6 months after that rainy morning encounter, Bennett was in the childcare facility during his lunch break, a habit he developed. He liked watching the children play, liked remembering that innocence existed, that trust was possible. Gabriel, now over a year old and walking with wobbly determination, spotted him immediately and toddled over, arms raised in the universal demand to be picked up. Bennett lifted the boy easily, marveling at how much he'd grown. Gabriel patted his cheek affectionately, then pointed at the blocks scattered across the floor with the imperious command of a tiny dictator. "You want me to play blocks?" Bennett asked, smiling. Gabriel nodded seriously, as if this were the most important business in the world. And in that moment, for Bennett, it was, Rosa entered the facility, looking for her grandson. She found him in Bennett's lap, the two of them constructing an elaborate tower that defied physics, and would inevitably collapse. She smiled at the sight, the tech mogul and the baby, both completely absorbed in their task. "He always wants you," Rosa said, settling into a chair nearby. "The moment you walk in, he looks for you." "He's a good judge of character," Bennett replied. "Better than I ever was." "You were always a good person, Mr. Cross. You just forgot for a while." Bennett looked up at her, this woman who'd entered his life by chance, or perhaps not by chance at all. "I'm not sure I ever knew how to be good. I knew how to be successful, how to be powerful, how to be rich. But being a good person, that's harder." "You're learning," Rosa said gently. "That's all any of us can do." Gabriel chose that moment to knock over the tower with gleeful destruction, clapping his hands at the cascade of blocks. Bennett laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and genuine, and started gathering blocks to build again. "Ms. Mendoza, Rosa, can I ask you something?" Bennett said as he stacked blocks. "Why do you think Gabriel reached for me that day? I was literally about to fire you, to take away your livelihood. I was at my absolute worst. Why would he trust me?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, watching her grandson play. "My grandmother used to say that babies and animals can see the soul beneath the surface. They don't care about money or status, or even actions, really. They see what's in the heart, what someone could be if they let themselves." She met Bennett's eyes. Gabriel saw who you really were underneath all the walls you'd built. He saw the good man you'd forgotten you could be. He gave you a chance to remember. "Do you think that's real?" "That babies can see that." "I think Gabriel saved both of us that morning," Rosa said softly. "You saved my job, yes, but you also saved yourself. You were drowning in your own success, Mr. Cross, and you didn't even know it." Gabriel threw you a lifeline. Bennett looked down at the child, who was now trying to put a square block into a round hole with determined frustration. I'm going to try to be worth that trust, he said quietly. Every day, I'm going to try to be the person he thought I was. You already are, Rosa said. You just have to keep remembering. That evening, Bennett stood once again at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the Seattle rain fall on the city below. But unlike 6 months ago, he wasn't alone with his failures. His daughter Emma was visiting, sitting on his office couch doing homework while they shared takeout dinner, a simple Thursday evening ritual they'd established. The board meeting materials on his desk could wait. The acquisition proposal could wait. Everything could wait for this, time with his daughter, time being a father instead of a CEO. Dad? Emma looked up from her calculus textbook. Can I ask you something? Of course. What changed? I mean, I'm glad it did, but what made you suddenly want to be around? To actually care. Bennett turned from the window to face his daughter. He could tell her about market forces or business strategy, or any of the comfortable lies he'd once hidden behind. Instead, he told her the truth. A baby reached for me when I was being cruel, he said simply. And I realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who'd lost everything that mattered while gaining everything that didn't. Emma processed this, her brow furrowed in thought. The baby in the daycare. The one you're always visiting. Gabriel. His grandmother works here. I was going to fire her, Em. I was going to destroy her life over a policy violation, without even asking why she'd broken the rule. And then this 8-month-old baby who didn't know me, who had no reason to trust me, reached out his arms and wanted me to hold him. Bennett's voice caught slightly. It broke something open inside me. I saw myself through his eyes, not as a CEO or a millionaire, but just as a person. And I didn't like what I saw. Do you like what you see now? Bennett looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She was so grown up, so thoughtful, so much her own person. He'd missed so much of her growing up, but maybe, it wasn't too late to be present for what came next. I'm getting there, he said honestly. I still make mistakes. I still have to remind myself that people matter more than profits. But I'm trying, Em. Every day, I'm trying to be better. Emma smiled, and it was like sunlight breaking through clouds. That's all anyone can ask for, Dad. That you try. Later, after he'd driven Emma home and returned to his apartment, Bennett looked at the photo he now kept on his desk, Gabriel at 8 months old, reaching toward the camera with that radiant, trusting smile. Rosa had given him the picture, insisting he should have it. To remember who you want to be, she'd said. Bennett touched the frame gently, a small smile on his face. Tomorrow he'd go back to Crosstech and make 1,000 decisions, some good, some bad. He'd negotiate contracts and manage conflicts and try to balance profit with principles. He'd make mistakes, certainly, because being better didn't mean being perfect, but he'd do it all as a man who'd learned the most important lesson of his life from a baby who couldn't speak. That true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts, that power meant nothing if it crushed the vulnerable, and that it was never too late to remember how to be human. Gabriel had reached for him in his darkest moment and had shown him the way back to light. Bennett Cross, for all his millions and all his success, had been saved by the trust of a child who saw something in him worth reaching for, and every day, he worked to prove that trust wasn't misplaced.